Imagine an all-natural extract that harnesses the power of time, the mysteries of nature, and the quality of age-old traditions in one small bottle. We live in an age where science and sustainability are inseparable, where technology and tradition work hand in hand, where consumers demand that cost-cutting never compromises quality. Our biotech oak extraction is revolutionizing the alcoholic beverage industry. We use 150-year-old French and 90-year-old American oak wood in a molecular extraction process that develops our unique congeners and stabilizers. Our 100% natural USA and EU organic certified products are used by brewmasters globally. Brewshield and Wineshield preserve the unique flavors of beer and wine and extend shelf life. Let us enhance, preserve, and transform the way you do business. The future of brewing and stabilization technology is here. And it starts with Stoke.
Hopefully everybody can see my screen here. As Patricia would have told you, I will just give you a brief overview of Brewshield. We have done a full brochure in Spanish, which hopefully you've been able to receive. If not, we will gladly send it to you. And we have a number of other supporting documents and papers that have been published, which from various laboratories that we've run tests and trials with, which we'll gladly share with anybody should you want to receive them. Really, what is Brewshield? Brewshield is a product that focuses on stabilizing your beer, and it protects not only the aromatics and flavor compounds, but it also looks at protecting your color profiles, specifically if you are doing a hazy IPA. Just some brief background. Brewshield was a part of a biotech team that started 12 years ago, was headed up by a very clever German vaccinologist who was involved in developing the last 4 children's vaccines. And he spent the better part of 7 years working out a liquefaction process whereby you could do all of the extraction to take, looking at wood, so taking 150-year-old oak wood and pulling it into a highly concentrated liquid. It's the closest you can come to having liquid wood. And he took a long period of time to pull this out. And what he was looking at doing and what he managed to achieve is that if you think about a tree that has been around for that long, it's all of those compounds that are in that tree that preserve it and keep it stable through a number of different conditions is what we are able to pull into a liquid. And it's these congeners and phenolics that are in the oak wood, which are powerful antioxidants, and that we've been able to pull out of the oak. Essentially, the way it works, and it's the science behind it is that beer staling takes place in the presence of transition metals. Transition metals are found naturally in your grains and malts. And what happens is transition metals, specifically copper, iron, and manganese, will react with oxygen. And when they react with oxygen, they create highly reactive oxygen species. And what these things do is they then react with your beer and they lead to the onset of staling or oxidation. And what Brewshield is able to do is that it quenches these oxidative reactions and prevents and delays the onset of staling. And this is where the real science behind it happens. It was originally developed for the organic wine industry, and we've been supplying that industry for over 12 years, and it's been in the beer industry for over 8 years already. Steve Gonzalez from Stone Brewing, along with Jeremy Marshall at Lagunitas, both ran the same trial originally, which was to test it on a Pilsner. And the reason they tested it on a Pilsner was that it would be the easiest beer to demonstrate whether or not there is any flavor addition. And they were able to show, as the first trial ran out, that it's flavor neutral. In other words, it's not going to impact your flavor at all. It won't add any flavor to your beer, which is very important. So really the science behind it, the original tests that were done by STABILISE, and STABILISE ran trials both in South Africa as well as in their lab in the UK, United Kingdom. And they use a test called ESR testing, electron spin resonance testing, which is the same as electron paramagnetic resonance testing. Very simply, it's an inverted cone. They spin your beer and they fire electrons at it, and they're able to demonstrate the oxidation process happening. The VLB in Berlin in Germany are one of the top labs in the world, and they were able to carry out tests on 3 different styles of beer, and were able to show a 77% reduction in all oxidative indicators. Very simply, the head of VLB wrote to us and said, you could quite easily and happily double your average shelf life across all beer styles. And this is very important when you're going to hear in a minute from 3 professional brewers and technical experts in this industry, and they can give you their own experience of it. Arne Mathieu, why he's important is that he was also the ex-SAB Miller master brewer, but he was also the technical director at SAB Miller for a number of years. He's a microbiologist and chemist, and he ran the very first ESR tests on it. When he left, he set up his own brewery and now uses Brewshield in all of his beers. Most recently, he won a gold award at the European Beer Awards for his IPA. Why this is important and why I mention it is that his beer had to sit and stood for 11 weeks before tasting happened. 11 weeks is a considerable amount of time for an IPA to be sitting around before any tasting happens. And why that's interesting is that the tasting, when they did it, is that his IPA was voted as the freshest tasting IPA there, which is after 11 weeks. And he credits this, not only obviously he makes a great beer, but in terms of being able to hold it, because it had to be transported a great distance. It was sat around in an unrefrigerated container for a number of weeks, and yet it held up all of its flavor and its aromatics for the competition. Chris Garrett is another customer in the US. Why this is very important is that at the beginning of this year, we did a taste test on a hazy IPA that he had brewed using Brewshield, and again, he uses it across all of his beers. His hazy IPA, we tested it, and there was a taste test with a number of people at 6 months. And you will hear from the 3 professionals that 6 months for a hazy IPA is almost unheard of. And this beer held up after 6 months. We tasted it off the tap. It not only held up on its flavor and its aromatics, but very importantly on its color. And you will know that when it comes to a hazy, the color profile starts to deteriorate within 3 weeks. The real craft beer challenges, as all of you know, are a number of issues, from organic materials, but specifically around supply chain and storage conditions. We've heard from a number of brewers that the number one challenge, unless you own your own distribution, is that the moment your beer leaves your brewery, that is when the real challenge starts. Beer gets transported across vast distances, and not necessarily always in cold storage conditions either. They get sat around on retail floors, in warehouses, and all of this leads to oxidation, as you're all well aware. The cost of losing a customer due to beer going off is significant. There was a recent report at the beginning of this year in one of the largest brewing magazines. They said for every beer that a customer has a bad experience with, he will tell on average 9 people. So for every bad experience, you have the potential to lose 10 customers. The cost of that is very difficult to quantify, and we'll get onto that in a minute. Fraser Dodge has been using Brewshield for many, many years. He's a beer judge. He's head of operations for Harfield and runs a big operation in Spain. And he was able to, he was the first brewer that was able to achieve great results on all of these beers, well past the 12-month shelf life date that he was set for his retail operations. This is an important slide, and it's very important. Why? Because we want to demonstrate how easy Brewshield is to use. It's a liquid. It's a highly stable product. You can keep it in your at ambient or conditions. In other words, just normal conditions. It does not need to be refrigerated. And we recommend adding it at whirlpool. And this is very important, that you can add it in the hot side or specifically at whirlpool, as it needs to be agitated in. Very importantly, and you may have some questions, it will not affect your yeast or your fermentation process. As a natural product, it needs some time to obviously work and develop with your beer too. It's dosed at very, very low rates. I'm very happy that Mexico is with the rest of the world on the metric system, which is great. And it's a very simple and easy measurement to achieve. We dose at 1.5 mils per 1,000 or per liter, and it's very easy to measure out, as the containers come in 5 liters, 25, and 1,000-liter totes. We can give you, there's a lot more on all of this information which we can give you. This is really to give you a background in terms of the application and how easy the dosing is. There's a lot more on the technical information, which I'll gladly send you, should that be of interest to you. And there's a technical sheet that we were able to give you too. We've said the Brewshield will have a 5-year shelf life, which is, and it can go on for many more months than that. But it's obviously important that it doesn't get sat outside in the hot sun like any other product that you have. This is probably the most important slide that we have, an important part of it, because it often comes down to, in the end of the day, is what does it cost? And what you're going to hear in a minute from the 3 professionals is that there is a lot more to consider when you look at the actual real cost of beer. We produced a paper called The Real Cost of Beer, and this was in collaboration with a number of our customers and very well-known brewers in the industry. And what we were able to do in this is to really unpack what the real cost of a beer is. Because the first mistake that a number of people will make is that they will add Brewshield as an ingredient cost. And the moment you do that, you set yourself up for a difficult discussion, because Brewshield is far more than that. When you understand what it adds to your beer, we've been able to demonstrate that it actually adds to your bottom line. In other words, it will increase the value of your beer, because your beer will be able to stay on the shelf longer, it retains its freshness for longer, and you will also hear that you're able to produce more beer and retain it as inventory without having to sell it immediately. And these all impact on the actual cost of your beer, which is very important. So we've done some calculations, and this slide really is just to demonstrate on average the typical cost of what most brewers will pay a premium on to do a beer such as an IPA or any other specialty beer. And this on average is between 10 and 12 US cents per can that you will spend. What's also important, and what we've highlighted here, is that it's these premium ingredients that you are spending money on that are the first to disappear the moment your beer starts to age. Now, this can happen as soon as 3 weeks after canning or bottling. So within 60 days or 90 days, those premium ingredients, they start to disappear significantly. The question you need to ask yourself, if you are spending around an average of 10 US cents per can, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to just keep it as a US cents for now, is that the cost of actually maintaining this surely must be a very important consideration. This slide is to demonstrate what it costs on average to produce a can of beer. Now, the cost around utilities and a number of others around taxes will differ, but on average, you're looking at anything between $1 to $1.69 to produce a can of beer. This is not including other things like operating expenses, equipment, or bank fees. Then we come on to what we call what is the cost to keep that beer stable. And this is a very important slide. You've got the investment in premium flavored products. You've got the investment, if this is the case, in terms of premium cold chain and distribution. Even if you own your own, there is a cost associated to it. You have recalls and out of code beer, which may or may not be an issue over here. And then if you do pasteurize, there's a cost associated to that. But on average, you could be looking at anything between 15 and 30 cents per can in order to look at preserving and keeping your beer stable. So Brewshield, this on average is between 1 and less than 1 US cents per can to treat your beer with Brewshield. If you think about that in terms of the overall cost and what it does in terms of preserving and keeping that beer stable, retaining the freshness and the flavor and the aromatics of your beer for much longer, giving you peace of mind that your beer can stand and sat on the shelf or in a warehouse, on a retail floor, or in the back of a distribution truck or other transport for much longer without giving you peace of mind that that beer will hold up. We've had beer tested in unbelievable stress conditions. We've put it through incredible heat changes, and you will hear from Chris Anderson in a minute some of the tests that he's conducted too. And they are all significant. And this is a very important aspect to consider. And rather, when you see it, it's not just the insurance in your beer, it actually adds to your bottom line. One of the key questions we get asked as well is approvals. Well, in the US, there are a number of approvals that are in place. They're in place not only for the organic wine growers and for the beer producers, but all of these approvals around the organic use cover Mexico as well. OMRI, which is a very important organic approval, which is required in the US for any organic product. And Brewshield is used in non-alcoholic beverages too, so natural fruit juices, non-alcoholic beers as well. And OMRI covers Mexico, as does EcoCert, which is the largest organic certification body in the world. Brewshield is distributed through John Fearless, and you've heard from Patricio, who can give you all his background in terms of any product, any trials, costing, will all be referred back to him. As I mentioned, there's a number of other products that are being used within Brewshield that it can, but where you'll see its huge benefit is not only in a Pilsner, in a lager, but you'll see an incredible benefit to you in any of your beers, such as hazies or other types of IPAs. So I just first of all want to say thank you, and I would like to introduce the three other gentlemen that I'm sure that you all would like to hear from. The first is Chris Anderson. Chris Anderson has been in the craft beer industry for over 20 years already. He founded his own brewing company, and in the course of his career, he has received over 200 medals in beer competitions, including World Beer Cup, Great American Beer Festival, Great Alaskan Beer, and other festival, as well as numerous other awards. He's worked at Midnight Sun Brewing, Broken Tooth Brewing, and Alaskan Brewing Company, to name but a few. Chris has been running his own consulting company for the past 4 years and has an intimate knowledge with Brewshield, having been one of the first people to use it, as well as working with all of our customers in both the beer as well as non-alcoholic beverage industry too. Matt Johnson has over 23 years brewing experience in the US. He is the former brewmaster of brewing operations at Carl Strauss Brewing Company. And during his time there, he has won more than 100 awards too, including the 2016 Mid-Sized Brewery of the Year Award at GABF. He is currently a member of the Hop Research Council, and he's also a current World Beer Cup judge and judge at GABF. Tom Tweedy He is over 18 years in the brewing industry and 10 years in the food safety and as a food safety practitioner. He has held global operations and brewing roles at Anheuser-Busch as well as at Stone Brewing Company. And he is very well known in the industry too. Tom is recently been appointed as VP Operations of a new brewery, which only starts next week. So I'd like to just hand over to these three gentlemen, starting with Chris Anderson, and they can give you some real insight, which is what you really want to hear, which is from very well-known, well-respected professionals in the industry. Thank you. Chris, can I hand over to you?
Good afternoon to you all, and thank you for your time. Yeah, I've been working with this product, Brewshield product, for right around 4 years, mostly with the trialing process amongst beginning with craft brewers, and most recently in the non-alcoholic beer realm as well. We've employed it in everything from nano type breweries.
Thank you for joining us today, everybody from Mexico. I hope everybody's doing well and everybody's safe. We thank you for taking the time to be here with us for our discussion. So I met with Andrew a few years back when he was touring the States with his product Brewshield, and he showed me a very similar presentation to what you just got to look at. And at that point, we were having trouble with our double IPA in 22-ounce bottles, really not retaining its freshness on the shelf. Being that you can't really control the distribution network, and those of you who can, that's great, but most of us cannot. Meaning, you can't control whether your beer gets warm, sits in a truck for hours and hours in the heat through the desert. It goes through many different temperature fluctuations. And we were finding that some of our beers that were in 22-ounce bottles and a little bit larger packaging types were going a little stale and losing their freshness, their hop aroma, their hop flavor rather quickly in the market, which left it sitting on the shelf longer and sitting in our warehouse even longer than that. So we tried Brewshield, followed the directions just like you said. It's really easy. Put it in Whirlpool, and it showed a great deal of improvement on our shelf stability and our shelf life, especially for beers that tend to go stale or oxidize a little bit quicker, such as double IPAs. So we put it in our big barrel double IPA, and we saw a pretty good or significant difference with the shelf life and the stability of our beer out in the market. We could count on it tasting good and as close to fresh as possible 2 or 3 months down the road. I think we established our shelf life on that beer's 90 days, and it held up for the 90 days, which was great. Before we'd noticed a lot of different places we returned it after a month of it being on the shelf because they said it was oxidized and stale and not good. Once we started using Brewshield in that particular product, it really helped with stability and the freshness of the beer and the way the aroma came through and the way the flavor came through as well. Now, we had not really gotten into too many hazies at that point, but for the double IPA and for those beers that you want to keep fresher longer, this product really, really works well. Easy to use, really doesn't get affected by much, doesn't add any color, doesn't add any flavor, and it's really helped with some of the stability problems that we were having in the market due to the supply chain. Most of our other beers didn't have that type of issues or those type of issues with the supply chain. They usually sold rather quickly, but we did notice some of the 22-ounce higher gravity options did not move as quick, and therefore we did start adding the Brewshield, and it really helped our product stay as fresh and as good tasting as it possibly could for the longest amount of time. So that's how I used it when I was at my previous position, and they continue to use it today. We've had a couple trials out there with some other breweries now that are thinking of the same thing. And I know Chris has used it a lot, and hopefully we'll get to hear once he comes back on a little bit more of all the things he added his into. He's got a lot of good experience with that, and also Tom Tweedy has some good insight on this product as well. So I think I'll hand it off to Tom right now, and then Tom, you can send it back to Chris.
All right, thanks, Matt. You know, I started thinking about, when we were speaking to the team about, the Brewshield, and I had a lot of questions when I first started dipping into it. And I also met Andrew at a convention. It was the Craft Brewers Conference, and I was very excited about the potential. And then being who I am, I basically start to ask those same questions about cost of goods. And one of my responsibilities is to separate out each individual component that goes into a beer in a calculation that you would call mass balance. Mass balance wise, this is a very, very small percent of the entire beer that you would make. If you consider like what goes into a bottle of beer or a pallet of beer, I don't think it would even be something that I would include in my mass balance calculation. And then I started to kind of think about some of the things that I had run into as far as how can I extend longer runs, right? And so like when this product would enable beer to be flavor stable, to be physically stable for a lot longer than we might be used to, it kind of revolutionizes the supply chain. So for me, I start to think about how much do you spend on the cost of conversion, so like the cost of scrap, and those are things that you consider if you have to constantly dial in and dial out of the beers that you're packaging in your packaging hall. What I mean is we got into the habit in a former company of only packaging how much beer was ordered at the time. Sometimes that was only about 4 pallets of beer. When you package only 4 pallets of beer, you can't really empty out your bright tank. And in the example of like the hazy beers, sometimes you get a stratification effect. And the longer that those beers will sit into the tank, the longer those solids will start to destabilize and cause basically what you would see as sludge into a bottle. This can help against that in many ways. And so one of the ways that I want to touch on is being able to run longer. You think about it in a maintenance sense, when you think about it in like a capital expenditure expense, your machines want to run long. They're designed to run longer runs instead of just like dial in, dying out. I took a swing at some of the costs and some of the impacts of having to do only shorter runs. So let's say that, in my example of a former brewery that I was at, your beer release setup looks like this. And so you would probably start out with deaerated water, chemical flush, let's call it peracetic acid, a CO2 purge, and then a beer pack, where you would use about 4 hec for the piping and then about 8 hectoliters for the bowl. Now these are all manufacturing equipment set points. The cost of that is, so 60 cases a pallet is about 1,440 cans, assuming that you have a 12-ounce. Now, 5 hectoliters per pallet or 20 hectoliters for a full run of 4 pallets of beer. You use 12 hectoliters of beer just to dump and do your line prep. If you were able to do a longer extended run, that's more than 4 pallets. If you were able to cycle through your bright tanks and actually just package out everything and know that the beer is going to be physically and sensory stable for longer, then you can escape all that cost and all that expense. And that's what really got me excited because changeovers require manpower, the cost of maintenance. I mentioned high BUD solids going to the drain, assuming that you're dumping your line prep beer, cost of chemicals, so like the savings is massive compared to the cost, of Brewshield per can. It's So that's what really got me excited, especially when you start to talk about, being able to run out your Fulbright and being able to calculate out the cost of conversion of cost of scrap and the sense of a supply chain. So for me, I completely intend on, bringing it in to my new brewery, and I'm excited by that because it's going to cost me a lot less money to produce beer, and that's what the really cost to benefit is to me. If anybody has any questions and answers on that, I mean, we can talk about the cost of a case of beer and go into the weeds on this, but I think it's best to hand it off to some of the brewing experts. And I think that Chris was up next. Chris.
Guys, hopefully I get more of a stable connection here. Guys will let me know if it's coming through choppy. But yeah, I've probably been using the product, trialing it, and working with brewers on a technical facet for going on 4 years. And through that experience, we've definitely seen a profound effect by the employment of Brewshield in a myriad of different beverages. I've used it everything from a non-alcoholic light lager all the way into a double IPA. I'd say the biggest challenge that brewers are up against is every brewer knows that his own IPA, only tastes good for a certain amount of time. That being said, we all know that we have longer shelf longevity numbers that are associated with those brands. Nobody, even myself, I can tell you my double IPA at my brewery doesn't taste very good past about 35 days. But we also had a 90-day shelf life on it. So that being said, it often leads to that quotient of a silent killer that I think Andrew alluded to, that that customer that gets that bad beer is going to tell 9 of his friends, and essentially you've lost 10 customers. In industry, we call that a silent killer, because that just dooms your brand. And I can just imagine that Mexico probably has a lot of the inherent challenges that my area, which is very hot. It's the desert. I live in the Coachella Valley in Southern California, which is very inherently full of problems with the whole distribution chain and beers essentially getting warm. So we've also seen impact on color stability. Most recently, we've done a lot of trialing within the hazy beer realm. And I think, as Andrew also alluded to, we've seen some haze stability issues with the advent of hazy IPAs becoming so prominent. We've seen significant, almost double the stability that you would get from your typical hazy beer through most trials, as well as the color of the hazies being more intact. They tend to change into a more of a beige hue. I also alluded that color stability in fruited sour beers. We recently did a trial with a brewer where they were using blood orange, and we were able to give them double the color stability of the blood orange hue, which gave this brilliant magenta, which is really what's selling the brand, is that color and that look. And they were finding that right around 60 days, that would just completely drop out and basically turn into sludge at the bottom of the bottle and kind of give the beer a little bit of a off-looking color, almost the color of like dead yeast. So they were able to employ that and had some really good results. We've also seen some scavenging effect in the non-alcoholic beers, which essentially this product would go into the finished beer going into the bright tank versus the whirlpool or post dealcoholization. And we've seen some significant numbers of scavenging where the numbers coming out of that machine would be, say, 40, 50, 60. With the overnight carbonation and adding Brewshield, we could see those numbers down into the teens, just as a result of the natural scavenging effect that this product has as being a powerful antioxidant. So those are just a handful of my experiences. And we continue to see more merits for this product every day as brewers get more creative. But I think you will all find that it has huge benefits to employ. It's not terribly expensive when you think about the scrap costs.
Yeah, I would like to add something there. So I know in the US, you guys normally most breweries maybe have something called like the recall system, right? When beers go bad, something like that, you can recall them, then send new ones, right, in better conditions. Unfortunately, that's something that's not really available in Mexico. Cold chain is also not available in Mexico. Basically, I mean, you could do cold chain, but it's too expensive and the end customer won't pay for it. So that's a real issue in Mexico, is that there's no cold chain, right? When you send a beer, you send it to normal packaging, and it might sit in the truck transporting the beer for a few days, then it gets to the distributor, and the distributor also has it in their warehouse at 30 degrees for a few weeks before it gets sold. And at the end of the day, maybe Mexican brewers might say, well, we don't have a recall cost, right? Because we don't recall our beer. Well, that may be true, but it also, then that means that the customer receives a bad beer, especially if there's hazy IPAs or double IPAs or any IPA. They go bad faster, right, than maybe other beers. So even if you don't have a recall cost, your cost, as Chris was mentioning, is the silent killer, right? Like consumer tastes your beer and it won't taste good, so now they will never buy your beer again. And it's not really your problem. Maybe out of your bright tank, the beer was coming out great, but by the time it gets to the consumer, it's not good anymore. And then you get the cost of losing that customer, and not only that customer, but all their maybe 10 of his friends, or all the people he tells about his bad experience that they had with the beer, right? So that's a real cost, and when you add up those costs to what Brewshield costs, Brewshield is actually making you more money than what it's costing you. I think you would agree with that, Andrew. And also just to mention that especially hazy IPAs tend to change their color with oxidation. And Brewshield doesn't only protect the flavor and aroma of hazy IPAs, but it also protects the color. Am I right, Andrew? Can you add a little bit more about that?
That's correct. So what it does is it does protect your, as you mentioned, your flavor and aromatic profiles, but also your color profiles. And as Chris alluded to in his experience with the blood orange, was able to retain that color for longer. They saw it 12 years ago when we were working in the wine industry, specifically on red wines. They were able to retain the color of those deep, rich red wines for much, much longer. And, from that, it's, in the wine, it will bind to the anthocyanins in that color, but in beer, it acts in exactly the same way. So yes, it will absolutely extend the shelf life of the color profile too.
Perfect. And we actually have two questions. I think Chris answered them, but I would like to go back to them. Maybe if some other of you guys have anything extra to add. So Rodrigo Organista is asking, will Brewshield provide protection on beer if bottles undergo a pasteurization process, especially in high hop rate beers? And I mean, the short answer is yes, it will, of course, and it will help with the heat created during the pasteurization process, correct? But it also, another thing to add there, I don't know, you may have something more to add to this, but I think especially IPAs or high hop rate beers, it's even better if you don't have to pasteurize them. Is it like with pasteurization, you lose a lot of that flavor from hops, the flavor and aroma. So maybe you, Andrew, or any of the other guys, could you use Brewshield to substitute pasteurization?
Yes, but I'm going to let Chris answer that, because for me, we have a number of customers that don't pasteurize anymore. There's obviously a huge cost associated to that, and there's some other issues which you've alluded to, which is what it does, the damage that it causes to your flavor. But rather hear from Chris.
Yeah, there's definitely what you talked about, Patricia, with the stability amongst the heat. I mean, there's kind of two schools of thought. I kind of alluded that maybe the caller was asking about batch and bath pasteurization, where the bottles are actually sitting and submerged in liquid. Those are really, really harmful to beer, and it definitely will help, but that's probably not the most ideal situation in terms of treating beer. I would go back to what Andrew said and say, for sure, we would probably use this in lieu of batch pasteurization or bath pasteurization. That being said, my own personal brand, which is a cider that we're producing, is flash pasteurized when we bring it in for dealkalization, and then we treat it with Brewshield post pasteurization, just as an added kind of reassurance, mostly for DO, dissolved oxygen ingress, but also for stabilization as well in terms of micro, being that this product doesn't contain alcohol or have those abilities that would thwart off microbial infection.
And then Ignacio Peña asked, will this product work for using clear bottles instead of dark ones? Will it make a difference on the product efficiency if you use one or the other? I mean, Chris already kind of responded to this, but I also just want to add that it definitely should work, even if it will apply it will help the beer not to oxidize as fast, but it's always recommended to anyways, even if you're using Brewshield, to use a darker. Will you recommend using a clear bottle? Or, I mean, even if you have Brewshield, it's better for you just to keep it with the dark bottle. I mean, normally I have never seen a craft brewery use a clear bottle, but maybe this is an interesting question for a brewer that is trying to use clear bottles on their beer. Like, would you recommend it?
The danger with clear bottles, and I think you can see this with any beer that's in a clear bottle, and I'm sure we all know of certain brands that are in clear bottles, is the light struck aspect of it. The UV light reacts with the hops that are in the beer, and that gives it that skunky type of aroma and flavor. And way back in brew school, we did tests with this. We left beer in clear bottle that wasn't even that hoppy out in the sun for 5 minutes, literally 5 minutes, and tasted side by side with one that wasn't in the sun. Completely light struck, completely skunk flavor and aroma, really ruined it. So no, it's not recommended that anybody put their beer, whether it's craft beer or not, in clear or even green bottles, because ultraviolet light can get through that green bottle as well. Now, Brewshield obviously will help with the oxidative effects in the stale part of any beer in any bottle, but and correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, but I don't think it has anything to do with ultraviolet light and the effects of light struck beer. So
yeah, as Matt said, it's not recommended at all to use clear bottles because it's not the wonder product to fix everything, but UV light is, as Matt's alluded to, it's going to affect your beer for sure.
There are some different hops you can use that are supposedly light stable. So if you have like a tetra hop or iso hop, then you can save some of the oxidative or some of the light strike effects, but it would be a different recipe.
Perfect. Andrew, we're right on time. We have 5 minutes left, probably. If you have something to add, we don't have any more questions. If you have something to add before I close.
Just very briefly, I would like to reiterate what Matt said. Thank you very much for joining us and for giving us the opportunity to talk about Brewshield. And hopefully you found this informative and useful. If you have any queries, you can contact Patricio directly. All distribution will happen via him. All pricing, any other information you would like, he has available. As I mentioned in the beginning, we have additional technical papers that we have, if that is of interest to anybody. They are in English. The brochure is in Spanish, but if you would like to see it and it would be useful, please let us know. And then obviously from a personal point of view, I want to just say thank you too for giving us the opportunity.